My next guest here on Emirates World has a very famous surname. It's author Fatima Bhutto, who's here to discuss her novels, which include Songs of Blood and Sword, The Shadow of the Crescent Moon, New Kings of the World, and her latest novel, The Runaways. Well, Fatima, welcome to Emirates, welcome to Dubai. You're a very busy lady. You've just been telling me about your travel schedule. My goodness me. Do you ever stop?
It doesn't feel like it. I think I've been on the move for years now.
Really? It's a busy life being a writer, isn't it? I mean, once you've written the book, you have to get out there and promote it.
Yes, it's true. You do kind of have to shepherd it around the world.
Yeah.
And I'd been traveling a lot for New Kings of the World as well, so it sort of feels like it never ends at the moment.
Do you enjoy the LitFest? Do you enjoy meeting your readers?
I do. You don't see anyone while you're writing, so you have months and years really of a quite solitary, lonely time. And then when the book is out, you're thrown into the deep end and you have to do the opposite, which is talk to lots of people all the time. So it's nice.
But it must be quite a nice sense of satisfaction to know that you've achieved something like a book and then people are taking an interest.
Well, I think as a writer, you do one part of the equation, which is you put the book together. And then the second part is to respond to how people receive it and to discuss it with people and to enter in the kind of debates that you wouldn't normally have in those quiet years of work.
How important is social media to writers these days in terms of getting the word out there?
Well, I'm not so sure that social media brings books to people. Because if you're looking at your phone all the time, you're not reading books. But I do think it is useful in connecting people to your journeys and sharing parts of your experiences with people who might not otherwise see certain things.
Do you have a very loyal social media clientele?
Yeah, I don't know. They seem quite nice.
Do you interact with them much?
It depends. I think certain platforms allow you to, so things like Instagram, you can do questions and people sending questions and you respond to them. Less so on Twitter, I suppose.
Yeah. You obviously have, I'm sure most people have twigged by now, a very famous surname. So let's get the question out of the way first. What is your relationship to the Bhutto family in Pakistan?
That would suppose that there is a singular unit.
No, the famous Bhutto family.
What is my you mean how do I belong to them?
Yeah.
Or
yes.
I'm the daughter of Murtaza Bhutto, who was the eldest son of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was Pakistan's first democratically elected head of state.
Right. So politics in the family?
Well,
dare I say?
I think you could say that politics, but more a sense of justice and sense of service. How different members have practiced or not practiced that is another story. But I think, yes, it's a family that has a connection to its country and whose roots are deeply embedded in its soil.
Have you ever come under any pressure to enter politics yourself?
There is pressure, certainly there is pressure, and I really am one of those people that thinks that politics is not something we have the luxury to avoid. I think we live in an intensely political world where all our choices and actions are deeply political. But I do think there are many ways to exercise one's politics today, and I've always done that through my writing.
One of the first books you wrote, and I'm just quoting from my notes here, was called Songs of Blood and Sword, and it described growing up in Pakistan, and in particular it recounted the assassination of your father. Tell us about those events, because the book itself caused quite a stir in Pakistan when it was released.
Yes, well, unfortunately, we see not just in Pakistan, but across South Asia, whether we're talking about India or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Afghanistan, that unfortunately violence and assassinations are used quite liberally in order to silence dissenters, critics, protesters, anyone who dares question the status quo. So my father's case is not unique, unfortunately. And Songs of Blood and Sword was a way for me to look at not just his murder, but also his life, and to talk about my family and their experience of justice and injustice, and the violence that at the time that I wrote Songs of Blood and Sword seemed very pervasive in the country.
And what sort of reaction did you get when the book was published?
Well, I think that, you know, it's hard to narrow down a reaction or an experience. I found people really incredibly warm, actually. It was a difficult book to write, obviously, because it was a book about extrajudicial killings. And when I was researching Songs of Blood and Sword, I kept expecting that people would be nervous to speak to me. And I would offer people constantly the right not to be identified in the book. And people didn't take it. I think Pakistanis are incredibly brave people. And they're people who have no interest in silence. They want to talk. We want to share our experiences. We're a generation, my generation, certainly grew up under the shadow of dictatorship. And I think that has made us a courageous generation in the fact that we do not want darkness, we want light. And we will do whatever we can to bring it.
I've never, unfortunately, regrettably, I would say, been to Pakistan. I'd like to one day. How would you assess the political situation now in the country? Reasonably stable? People being optimistic about the future? What would you say?
Well, I think the political situation, unfortunately, never really gives us very much cause for hope. Unfortunately. However, I think that the Pakistani people's response, their questioning, their calling power to account is something that is a source of hope. I think that we have an experience as a country of many years of difficulty, of danger, and I really think we want something else. We want peace with our neighbors, we want peace in our region, we want the right to challenge not just politics, but challenge the vision of our country and to create a vision that's more encompassing, more compassionate, and includes everyone.
Now, you're here in Dubai to talk about your books, one of which I've had the pleasure of reading, and I'll pop it up to the camera now. It's called New Kings of the World, Dispatches from Bollywood, DZ and K-pop. Yes. And from a very serious tome about growing up in Pakistan and what happened to your father, we're now looking at K-pop, which my daughter is absolutely besotted with, Bollywood and Turkish soap operas. So quite a contrast. Tell us about why you decided to embark on this particular project.
Well, it sounds like it wouldn't be serious, but actually there's a very serious things. Culture is a weapon. Culture is a way of influencing people, of persuading people. It's a way of presenting a nation's image out to the world, rather than what a nation really is. And so New Kings of the World looks at 3 countries, and it's actually a book about globalization, about the betrayal of globalization. It's about neoliberalism, and it's about the politics of popular culture. I think as audience members, we come to culture innocently. So we'll turn on a television show or a film, or even listen to K-pop, really as someone who wants to be entertained. But the producers of those cultural products are not producing that culture innocently. So it's all coded with very serious political messages, with certain histories, and with agendas, and that's really what the book is about.
I'm staggered because, as I said, my daughter is fanatical about K-pop and listens all the time, and I always regarded it as being a very innocent entertainment pastime. But there's something more sinister going on, do you think?
Well, yes and no. I think the thing that most interested me about K-pop when I was researching New Kings of the World is the fact that K-pop's origins come really from the Asian financial crisis. So it was in the late 1990s, after South Korea had been very badly hit by the crisis, that they were struggling to rebuild their economy. And they had to reimagine how their economy would look like. It couldn't rely on the industrial behemoths as it had before the crisis. And the president at the time, President Kim Dae-jung, decided to refocus his country's efforts on information technology and popular culture because they required talent and time, no real organizational infrastructure. And so it was around 1997, 1998 that South Korea started to invest very heavily in culture, in the arts. They poured, millions and millions of dollars into the cultural ministries. They wired the country with broadband internet before almost anyone else. And it's from there that K-pop is born. So, we as you just said, we think it's a kind of silly, frivolous thing, but it has quite political origins.
Yeah. What about the Turkish soap operas? Those, I have to admit, I have no knowledge of whatsoever, but clearly a force to be reckoned with.
Yes, today Turkey is second only to America in terms of global television distribution. So Turkish television shows, which are called dizi, are epic dramas. Each episode is 2.5 hours to 3 hours long. They cover anything from modern dramas to historical epics. And they've been watched by hundreds of millions of people all around the world.
And what's behind those? You talked about K-pop and how the government deliberately set out to encourage the growth of entertainment. What's behind dizi?
Well, dizi is popular largely, I think, for two reasons, which is that if you belong to a country, let's say, outside of the West, if you have hundreds of millions of people who have been left behind by globalization, who were promised access to riches, opportunity, wealth, and migrated, hundreds of millions of people have migrated from rural homes into cities, imagining that they would be welcomed and received, and found that they weren't. They were actually unmoored and abandoned. The city is a faceless, nameless place, unlike the village. There were no structures to help strangers. So you might move from a place where everybody knew who you were and was able to help you to a place where nobody knows who you are and is unwilling to help you. And those hundreds of millions of people don't see their stories reflected by Hollywood. If you're watching Fast and the Furious 7 or 15 or whatever number they're on now, and you're somebody struggling to earn a living, a dignified living in a city, living in a uncomfortable, crowded home, that film doesn't relate to you. But when you watch something like dizi, which is really about ordinary people at the core, trying to live dignified lives against the force of the world against them, that's something that speaks to you very strongly. Dizi look modern. They have all the landscape of modernity, cities, cars, beautiful production value if we're talking about the historical shows. But yet they are rooted in a very traditional morality. So they're shows you can watch with your entire family. Nobody has to cover their eyes or cover their ears. It's safe viewing. It's viewing with strong morals and ethics. And I think that's not an accident. I think they're produced in that way, and the appeal is enormous.
And the third new king is Bollywood. We all know Bollywood movies. I quite enjoy watching them as well.
Yeah.
I mean, what a huge industry that has become. And billions of people in India and all over the world are fans of Bollywood.
Yes, I wrote about Bollywood as a mirror really for Indian society. Bollywood films have always reflected the country that they're made in and that country's journey. And they go through quite a serious spectrum. So the Bollywood films of the 1950s are all about the hope and idealism and fraternity of a newly independent India. The heroes of those films are not big men, they're poor men, but they're men with a great optimism in the path ahead. And then if you look at the Bollywood films of the 1970s, again, the hero is still a poor man, but he's not an idealist anymore. He's somebody who has been hurt by the system, wounded by the corrupt police officer or the corrupt chief minister. And he begins to fight back. They were all socialist in spirit, really, until the 1990s. And that's when India starts to undergo neoliberal economic reforms. And from that point onwards, the hero of Bollywood films is not a villager, and he's not a poor man. He's now a hedge fund banker with a BMW who lives in Dubai or New York or London.
Right.
And it changes, and unfortunately, I think we see a lot of quite intense political propaganda in Indian films today. They're inflammatory, and they're not really as watchable as the films of the past. So I started writing New Kings of the World in 2017, and I think a lot has changed. So if I was writing the book today, I'm not sure I would have included Bollywood as one of the new kings.
Your latest book is called The Runaways, just out recently. Tell us about that.
Well, The Runaways is a different sort of book. It's a novel, so it's a work of fiction about several young people who run away from their homes in England and in Pakistan to join a radical movement. And it's a novel that questions radicalism, and it's a novel that questions specifically the fact that in the West, at least, many people seem to believe that radicalism is spurred on by religion. And The Runaways makes the case that religion has nothing to do with it.
That's quite a brave thing to say, I would think, because, as you say, most people think that they associate radicalism with religion, but you're saying otherwise.
Yes, I think as someone who comes from Asia, someone who comes from the Muslim world, I think for us it's been quite obvious that what people are responding to is the fact that they're angry, that they're wounded, that they're isolated, that they're afraid. And that religion, if anything, is a protection against radicalism. You know, MI5 has done studies that have shown that quite clearly. People with established religious backgrounds are insulated from radicalism, not driven to it. Mm-hmm. Radicalism, in my mind, is caused by one quite serious factor. If you have generations of young people, and I would say especially in the West, but certainly everywhere in the world, who don't see a place for them in their country's future, who don't see a vision for their future, where they have a voice, where they have a place in society, where they're welcomed, where they're accepted, and where they have a chance to have a dignified, honorable future, then they will be vulnerable to any future that is offered to them. And I think radical groups understand that, and that's what they offer displaced, unsettled, angry young people. They offer them a quite seductive future, a place where their voice will be heard, where their needs will be met, and where they will be welcomed. And I really do think that's what people are responding to.
It's quite unusual, Fatima, to meet someone that can flip from being a fiction writer to a non-fiction writer. From your perspective, are the disciplines quite different? Do you approach it in a different way?
Yes, they are very different. They're like two separate languages in a sense. So you can't really do them simultaneously because your ear is attuned to one language. Non-fiction I always enjoy because it's a discovery, it's a hunt for something. It's a question that drives you to look for answers. And so it's a clearer path, and it's a more collaborative path because you have to interview people, you have to travel, you have to look for things. Whereas fiction rather is a more solitary, secretive path because you need a lot of time and space to build a world in your head, and you need focus and concentration to do that. But it is more liberating in a sense because you have really not control over the dominion that you're building, but you have access to a world that exists only to you. And that's quite exciting for a writer.
When you set out to write a book like the Runaways, how far do you plan the whole novel? Do you, before you sit down and start writing, do you have the whole plot worked out in your mind? Do you sit and do a mind map of what's going to happen with all the characters, or does it evolve as you go along?
Well, I think it evolves as you go along, and not to sound fantastical, But the characters make their own choices somewhere along the way. So I always plan a part of it. You know, I have an idea in my mind.
A structure.
Yeah, I have an idea in my mind of what I want to do. And then I find once I start writing, the characters will just go off in their own direction. And sometimes you're sitting there thinking, oh, I didn't expect that.
Oh, really?
But you follow it and you see where it goes.
All right.
And sometimes you follow many different paths before you find exactly where it's going.
I mean, leading the life you do, I'm sure you meet many, many people as you travel around the world, and I'm sure you have a huge following. Do you ever base any of the characters in your book on inadvertently on people you know or people you've met?
I don't think so. Certainly you don't set out to. Usually fiction writers will tell you they're really exploring things that they're obsessed by. Those are not necessarily people, but ideas, problems, strange things that they haven't been able to work out in any other way. But in a way, being a writer is like being a magpie. You're always picking up little things, whether it's
Little
the way,
nuggets.
whether it's the way someone speaks, or the way someone moves, or how someone looks when they feel something. And you never really know what you've picked up until you see it on the page somewhere.
So as we conclude our interview, it's been great talking to you, Fatima. What does the future hold? What are you planning now? What are you going to be back here in 2 years' time promoting?
Well, I don't know yet, Steve, because the Runaways and New Kings came out quite soon after each other. And so I'm obligated to them for a little bit of time. But I will go back to work, and I'm not sure yet whether the next book will be fiction or non-fiction. But I do hope to be back here in 2 years' time with something.
Will you come and see us?
I would love to.
Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. You too.